the company that was responsible for sending cars overseas said, well, this is no good, we can't sell this because it's too wide to go through the door onto the ships, which are taking 1,000 of them to Australia. I said, if we sell a car to Australia, you know, it'll be shipped on its own, probably in a container or something, you know. And they said, yeah, but we can't do this. And anyway, how are we going to fit snow chains, you know? And I mean, so these people...
Did they have many snow chains in Australia?
They would come over from every part of the company and say, well, you can't do that. You know? I mean, the other thing is it uses a Mustang instrument pack. And the Mustang instrument pack is part of the ECU, the electronic control unit. So the instrument pack is looking at whether the fuel filler flap is closed, you know, whether the locking mechanism on the hood has locked it shut, and all of these things. Otherwise, it's limpo mode and it would go 20 miles an hour. So we found a Dutchman who sold us a kit, and it's like £120 a car, which goes behind the instrument pack, which tells the instrument pack everything's fine. Everything's locked, the windows are fine, the fuel filler's closed, and it was so, you know, there was never that breadth of thinking, somebody's got to have thought of this, you know, for sure. If you make a racing Mustang, which is what he made them for, then he doesn't want to know whether fuel filler exists or not. So that's the kind of thing, actually, which is silly. I mean, this is an early one, and what's great is it's the first proper one that we did, and it's in all the brochures and things, you know.
And what's your view on ring versus no ring on the back?
Well, what happened again was that when at MG Rover, the ride and handling and aerodynamic people would insist that they would take the car to the wind tunnel, and they would come back and say it's got to be like this. And so between those two, the people who took a car from ride and handling, and they took it to Italy, and they said, oh, it understeers terribly, so we put a much bigger spoiler on the back. I said, if it's understeering, why would you make it even worse? So, you know, I believe a word of that. And I mean, it actually, but it understeers a bit because of the geometry rather than because of the aerodynamics. So when we did the wing on the SVR, in effect, it had to not work. Which, and I don't mean that unkindly, but you know, it was necessary to. Like the vents at the side, they said, oh, well, you can't have a hole in there. You know? I said, well, they've got to work. Yeah. So the air has to come out of there, which it's like kind of obvious stuff, really.
Because this is really, I think, a very aggressive looking car, how hard was this to sell to the board when they're all sitting there having this chat as we are doing now?
It was actually fine because, well, Nick Stevenson, of course, wanted it to be 1,000 horsepower. You know, because everything had to be 1,000 horsepower. You know, because that was the figure he plucked out of the air. But because I had an idea that the bill of materials for the whole thing, including building the car, should be £45,000. Yeah, and so we could then sell it at 55 or 60 grand, which, you know, jolly decent profit with it. And Kevin said, no, we can get 80 grand for this. You know, and the problem was the customers didn't really agree because it was never meant to be an 80 grand car. It would have been quite different if it was. You know, so to that extent, I mean, with the interior, we had a tiny budget, you know, but it you know, it came out quite nice inside. And I mean, it was meant to be aggressive in your face, and that was because what Nick rightly said is we want something that shows what a gutsy ones we are. You know? And I said, well, that's fine. So it'll be quite aggressive, but like we won't spend millions on the headlights, you know, or the tail lights, which are from probably from Bosch, I would think, if I remember rightly. So, you know, we didn't have it, and the way we built the car was what I call a virtual factory, where for Cowland Bosley, who built the first cars, and they had a very nice little production line. It was building them, and it had water tests, and it had the lights that shone on it to check the paint, and it had machines which filled it with engine oil and gearbox and all the rest of it. And I said, for Cowland Bosley will then pay for the car to go to a company which was called Tesco, but not like, you know, the supermarket, and they put the panels onto the car. The panels were made in a very clever carbon system by some people called SP Systems on the Isle of Wight, and their task was to make those panels, and they were flat, but they were designed that they would fit exactly in the tooling. They went in a cooled van down to Italy, and so SP paid for the van going to Italy, which wasn't a lot when you took, you know, 20 kits or something. And so each person would then pay for the next bit of shipping. So our factory was virtual. The cars came back to be painted, and unfortunately, MG Rover insisted that they could paint them. Yeah. So the first they did was attack them with an orbital sander, which of course, with the carbon was, well, it was just unreal. So XK Engineering, who was the company that they did repairs, but they did all the and they painted them for us. Yeah. So while they were there, they were looking out, and then they came back and were finally trimmed. That was the only bit that happened in MG Sport Racing. So we didn't have the investment in the factory itself, and it added surprisingly little to do this virtual factory. Which was, I mean, the one bit we were stuck with was the windscreen, and the windscreen was part of the original Cavalli, and we had the CAD at that time for the windscreen. But what we didn't know was that Gandini, who surprisingly had designed the car, and he didn't like the windscreen, and he changed it, and it was nothing like the CAD. And so when we first did it, and we had a Cavalli windscreen, it didn't fit at all, because it wasn't the same shape. And it's got, and I'm sorry for the owner, it's got a terrible flat in it, just there. And you can, when you do this, you can feel it.
Every time you watch it now, you'll notice.
With apologies to the owner. So that, all that stuff became much more of a struggle than it should have been. But we simply made the car fit the windscreen, which was.
But can you still believe that they allowed you to make it? Think of what they were doing at the time as a company, and then they let you build this.
Yeah, because Nick was keener on this than he was on the new medium car, to be honest, because he just had this idea of 1,000. He was a drag racer, which is why I first met him, and it was actually an autocar too, and we sat next to each other and we talked about drag racing and stuff. You see, we both around, we like drag racing, and he really wanted something to go drag racing with, which was kind of fine, but he missed the point that the company's task actually was to make money selling Rover 25s. So, which was quite difficult, that really, but that was just how it was. So
what was the dealer's reaction when you showed it to the dealers for the first time? What did they say?
Well, until they heard Kevin say the price, it was the little City Rover, which was a Tata car. It should have been, they were buying them from Tata for $3 grand, so it should have been like a $5 grand car, not whatever it was, 10 or 12 or something. Yeah, because there was a kind of let's get rich quickly with this sort of thing, so that was quite difficult actually.
I'm very glad you did make it. Let's move on to the XR15.
We will.
Yeah.
I mean, this